Welcome to GayintheCLE. If this is your first time being here, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button below. That way any new content comes out, you'll always know when it's happening. If you're a returning visitor, welcome back. Please make sure that you're giving this video, if you like it, a big old thumbs up. And make sure that you let me know of any other content that you might want to see in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts and be able to incorporate it in some way. Today I thought I would share with you the evolution of gay language. That's right, we do have our own language. And it's been used throughout history as a way for us to communicate with each other so that others don't necessarily know what we're talking about. What would be considered the first gay vocabulary started in roughly the late 1800s and early 1900s in Great Britain. This was called Polari. Polari is an amalgamation of different slangs and dialects that created a new one. In a previous video, I touched a little bit on where Polari started. You can find that link above. But as a quick synopsis, Polari is a mixture of a couple different languages and some slang that was popular in Britain at the time. There was also a mixture in of what's called rhyming language, and this gave the ability to be able to use words that had no real meaning together as a way of creating words for us. Polari was our way of actually outing ourselves to each other. It was a way of letting two gay men know that they were both gay and they were okay to talk to, or date if that was where they were looking to go. Polari was still used in Great Britain up until 1980. There are still some words that are still circulated today, but for the most part it started losing its favor in the early 60s. In America, the LGBT population learned very quickly that if we wanted to be accepted, we had to fit in. So working with groups like the Mattachine Society, they worked to normalize LGBT populations to be more like their heterosexual counterparts. So Polari didn't really take a firm root here. So I thought it'd be interesting today that we would actually go over some of the terms so you could see what Polari was like and how it was used in a day-to-day. Hello my lovies, zhuzh your e-calf raya, grab a bevy, and join me as we sharper for gay Polari through history. Is basically a way of saying, hello my lovies, fix your face, your hair, grab a beverage, and join me as we search for gay slang through history. Polari is a way to talk around a subject. It's a way for you to discuss things in front of people who don't know that you're gay and not have to worry about being arrested. It seems like a really odd way to say things, but when you deal with the fact that in Britain at the time that Polari was most popular, it was still legal for us to be gay. Basically meaning the sheer thought of you actually dating someone of the same sex could cause you to get arrested. And from there you could be pronounced as insane and go through such treatments like chemical castration. If you want a good idea of what it was like to be gay in Britain at the time that Polari was used, look for the movie Imitation Game. That was a movie that starred Benedict Cumberbatch, and he played Alan Turing, who was a closeted gay male. Just simply finding out that he was gay created much more hassle for his life and actually brought it to a tragic end long before he ever got to really fully embrace his potential. That is what living in Britain during this time frame would be like. I thought I would share a little bit of Polari with you so you can get an idea of what some of the words were like. AC/DC. This is a Polari term used to describe a bisexual. It's a play on an electricity term using between alternating current and direct current. Basically saying this is a person who can flip between dating someone of the opposite sex as well as someone of the same sex. Bijou. Bijou is a term used to talk about something that's small. You and your friends could go out and get a bijou bevy, which would basically mean you're going out to get a small drink. Or you can go out to a bijou club, which is a really small club, something like a neighborhood bar. Rough trade is a term I've used before. Rough trade is actually the term used for sex with someone who fits a very hyper-masculine presenting or someone who is a blue-collar worker. It's just a way of talking about someone who is a potential sex partner who does appear to be more masculine. Slap is an old term that also has a reference to a modern term that has changed quite a bit. Slap is a reference to putting on makeup. You can think of it as beat in modern terms. Polari also used a lot of initial talk. So TBH is a reference to be had. This is also a term that would be referencing someone who is a potential sex partner. Zhuzh. Zhuzh is a term that means to fix up. If you remember the sentence that I introduced you to, zhuzh your e-calf and raya is a way to say to fix up your face and hair. This term has made a leap into modern slang and it has changed a little bit in how it's used. Zhuzh can now be used to mean a whole host of things besides just fixing something. I'm curious if you've heard any of these Polari terms before, or if you have favorite terms. If you do have something that you like using or still throw into some of your conversations, hit me up in the comments below. I'd love to hear what those are. So as I mentioned, Polari kind of lost its favor in most of the world in the 80s. You can still find it in places in Britain. It still is in use. Some of the words are still circulating, but for the most part, Polari has kind of fallen off. In America, we started to develop our own slang in the early 80s, and that carried through probably until about 2000 or so, where things changed again. So when I came out in the 90s, our slang at the time was much different than what Polari was, but it still was constantly changing. I can remember terms that we used then that have fallen by the wayside quite a bit or have moved on to be something different. So I want to walk down memory lane a little bit and share some of the terms that I grew up with and how they were used. Bar biography. Bar biography is a term that describes how you inflate your own personal history to make yourself more attractive to a person. It's a way of saying that you're doing something that you may not do. Think of it this way. I met Jake last night at the bar, and he tells me he's a heart surgeon, but I find out that's just his bar biography. What he actually does is work at the local gas station. The next is breeder. Breeder is a term that we use for straight people, for the simple reason that heterosexuals are the ones who do breed. They are the ones who make new kids, new small versions of themselves. Straight people are the ones that do produce offspring, therefore they're breeding. Bumping pussies, my favorite term from the 80s and the 90s. And no, it's not cats fighting. Bumping pussies is a reference to two bottoms that are dating each other. The theory behind it is that two bottoms can't do anything together in bed except bump pussies, referencing that they're both receivers, that what can they do in bed together. Sticking with the thought process from Polari of using initial talk, we had our own in the 80s. CED is one of them. Cosmetic effects of distance. A way that makes more sense for me to say it is that talking to a guy in the bar and he seemed like such a Chris Hemsworth until you got him back to your place and the lights came on, and that's when you realized he was actually a Jack Black. It's saying that because you weren't close enough to the person and the lighting wasn't great, they seemed much more attractive than they actually were. Don't clutch your pearls is another term from the 80s. Essentially what you're telling someone is not to become overly dramatic about a situation. You could be talking with your best friends, things get elevated over whatever subject you're bringing up, and there are dramas being thrown left and right. You can look at them and say, Mary, don't clutch your pearls. Fruit fly is another popular term from the 80s and 90s. It was a way of referring to a woman who enjoyed hanging out with gay men. There's also the term fag hag, which is a little harsher to say than a fruit fly. Neither of them are overly flattering to the person you're talking about. It is usually more of a derogatory term that we use to talk about straight women who hang with us. That's not to say that we hate straight women by any stretch of the imagination. While they may be a friend, it's just a way of describing the fact that this person only hangs out with gay men. Pushin Box is an amazing term from this era. It's used in a twofold fashion. For the first part, Pushin Box refers to someone who is trying to enhance what they have been given naturally. It's a way to draw your attention to someone's basket, someone's box. From my gay youth, Pushin Box was a term that we used to talk about a top. This was the person who was making sure that you saw that they were packing really nicely. They were drawing attention to it. It was right out front. It was staring you in the face. Pretty well you could set a drink on it, walk away, and come back and the drink would still be there. That's what Pushin Box would be. It was a way for a top to express his endowments to a bottom. It was also used negatively. Pushin Box could be used to talk about someone who was patting themselves to look like they had more than they actually did. So imagine this. You pick up a guy at the bar, take him back to your house. He drops his pants. He pulls out a roll of socks. The next day you're having brunch with your besties and you're saying, I cannot believe I took Tommy home last night. He was totally Pushin Box. And they would understand that this dude was probably not really as highly endowed as he let himself be believed to be. If you see Tarzan but hear Jane, this is a reference to someone who has a very nice body and looks really butch, but when they open their mouth, all you hear is Jane, a high-pitched squeaky voice. Yes, it's another one of those derogatory terms that we use to talk about someone who presents themselves to be masculine when their actual affectations are much more feminine. The three gets. That's a term that's used to describe someone who's only good for three things: to get home, to get off, and to get out. If you think about it in more modern terms, this is probably our Craigslist hookups. We didn't have Craigslist in the early 80s into the 90s. It didn't come into the late 90s, so you dealt a lot with trying to pick up people in bars or in cruising areas. So these were the places that you would go for the three gets. Basically just to grab a quick go and be done with it. So there's just some few slangs from the 80s and the 90s, things that were a bit more popular. But as you can see with most slang, it does change over time. And typically when we're using terms, they're not always in a positive fashion. Until you move into the 2000s into today, you still have a lot of shade throwing terms that are out there. But there's also a much wider range of things that can be a bit more positive. So let's look at some of those from today. We mentioned slap with Polari. In modern terms, the same thing, as I mentioned, is beat. To say that your face is beat is to imply that you have really good or really flawless makeup skills. This is really something that's only used in drag terminology. It does play over in not drag areas, but it is definitely something you would say a queen has her face beat to the gods, for example, which means they are wearing their best possible makeup. Boots. Boots is used as an exclamation. It's like the highest form of excitement. It's used to show the highest form of emotion. An example would be, she lip synced the house down boots. It is saying that her lip sync was flawless. Her lip sync was untouchable. She dusted her lip sync. Building off of drag terms, you'll probably hear this one a bit more on specific shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. Chicken cutlets is a term that is used much more in the drag community than anywhere else. It is essentially referring to pads that are used for breast enhancement or hip enhancement. When they're laying out somewhere, they kind of look like a chicken breast. I just mentioned dusted, so let's give a little bit more of what dusted means. It's a way of saying that you crushed something or you destroyed your competition. You are a shade assassin. The way that you dusted them was amazing. A newer term that you don't hear a lot is flooded my basement. It is an amazing term to talk about how someone really turns you on sexually. It's a reference to women and in a state of arousal. It means that something is so amazing that it's like getting you wet. So there I was standing in line at Starbucks when this guy who looks like Chris Hemsworth came in, brushed against me and said hello. I literally flooded my basement. Curious what you think about this comment. Hit me up below, let me know what your feelings on it are, if you've ever used it, ever heard it used, or if you have a better comment that you would use in a situation like that. Judy. Judy is a term that you would use to describe someone who is your best friend. You would call them your best Judy. To say someone is like peanut butter would be a reference of saying that they are easy to spread. His legs are like peanut butter would be a way of saying that his legs are easy to spread. And lastly, we have seafood platter. Just like many other gay terms are used as both derogatory and a way to poke fun at something, seafood platter is another one. It refers to a woman's lady bits. Think of it as saying that your dress is so short that you're serving us a seafood platter. It essentially would mean that your dress is very, very short and all of your goods are hanging out for the world to see. I'm curious of what some of your favorite terms are, or if you've used any of these terms yourself. If you have, hit me up in my comments below and let me know some of your favorite terms. Who knows, I might be able to use those in another video at some point. So this is just a small collection of gay terms and how they've changed from the 1960s until today. As I've said, many of the slang words that we use fall in and out of favor or change over time. It's always nice to be able to go through and look at some of the things that were once used and see how that they're used today, or even see how they may have changed and become newer words. If you have any slang that you use that I haven't mentioned, please hit me up in the comments below. I'd love to hear what those are. If you like this video, give it a big old thumbs up. I appreciate that every time that you do. Leave me any comments on anything that you'd like to see in future videos. I love to incorporate what you want to see in a video so I can bring you the content that best works for you. After all, that's what I'm here for. Remember, if you haven't, always check out my blog. It's a companion to this YouTube channel. It's GayintheCLE.com. There I go over things like politics and history a bit more in depth. You can always send me an email. It's GayintheCLE.com. Seen right here. And we'll catch you next time. Really?